Now we could talk about how to attain sweetness in ibadah. The first step is to steer clear of the opposite, which means staying away from sins. Sins act as a wall that prevents you from experiencing the true joy of ibadah. The greater the sins are, whether they're major or minor sins, the further away you are from savoring the sweetness of ibadat. Wuhayb ibn al-Ward al-Makki was a tabi'i, and he was asked, can someone who's sinning experience the sweetness of ibadah? He said no. He said merely thinking about sinning will cost one the sweetness in his ibadah. Keep in mind, sweetness in your ibadah is something you should experience in this dunya. Inna al-abrara lafi na'im. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said the pious, the righteous, will be in joy and in delight. That's not limited to the akhirah. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala said, don't think inna al-abrara lafi na'im wa inna al-fujjara lafi jahim only applies to the afterlife. Meaning that joy is not only the joy and delight of the akhirah. He said na'im here refers to the feeling of joy that occurs in all three phases of existence. He means by that the righteous will enjoy sweetness in this dunya, the first phase, and in the second phase, in the barzakh, the intermediate state, in the grave, and in the afterlife. You need to feel that sweetness in this dunya, and that only comes through ibadah. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala stated something very essential about this. And I'm referring to the meaning rather than the direct word for word translation, as I'm not using any notes and I haven't reviewed it in some time. He said rahimahullah ta'ala, if you don't feel sweetness and joy in your heart when you perform ibadat, then you're doing something wrong. Why? Because he said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ash-Shakur. Ash-Shakur means he's the most appreciative. That means he rewards those who perform ibadat with a sense of sweetness in their hearts, and he grants them peace of mind in this dunya, because he is Ash-Shakur. And that's aside from what they get in the akhirah. So if you don't feel that way, then something about your ibadah isn't right. It needs improvement. What one should look into, if they're not feeling this, is the effect of sins on taking away the blessing of sweetness in ibadah. A poet, and it's supposedly attributed to Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, said, إِذَا كُنْتَ فِي نِعْمَةٍ فَرْعَهَا فَإِنَّ الذُّنُوبَ تُزِيلُ النِّعَمِ. If you find yourself in a state of blessing, cherish it, because sins erase those blessings. Protect your ni'mah and blessings through obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He's swift in His retribution. As a believer in Tawheed, among the biggest ni'am of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth is finding sweetness in your ibadah. That's a ni'mah that many people fail to recognize as such. When you talk to a lot of people, they often say things like, I don't want to sin because I'm making dua for a promotion, and I don't want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to turn me down. I don't want to sin because I don't want to face financial problems or issues in my marriage, or so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can grant me a righteous spouse. Their focus tends to be more on worldly concerns when it comes to the consequences of sins. But the consequences of sins aren't just limited to the physical, visible troubles that you face in your health and in your finances. There's something even more subtle and more impactful. It's when the light of Iman fades from the heart, and then it causes one to lose the sweetness of ibadah. That's truly among the gravest and greatest punishments of sins. The sweetness of ibadah is among the greatest blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows on a believer. Strive to experience this joy. And when you reach that status, hold on to that mighty blessing tightly. Ibn al-Jawzi attributed to Ahbar Bani Israel, a scholar or the scholars of Bani Israel, that one or some of them said, "Oh Lord, Ya Allah, how many times do I disobey you without facing any punishment?" And it was replied to them, "How many times were you punished without you even realizing it?" He was told, "Haven't you been deprived of sweetness in your ibadah?" That's something overlooked by many. The price of glancing at haram or casually saying a few words of haram can lead to losing the sweetness in one's ibadah. Sins take out the blessing of the sweetness of ibadah and wipe it out. The Salaf had a different perspective than we do. They believed that one of the worst consequences of sinning was losing out on the sweetness of ibadah. Imagine this. It's Maghrib. During Ramadan, it's Maghrib and you're super hungry. And a mouth-watering meal is placed right in front of you. But when you take a bite, it has no flavor to it. That's what it feels like to do ibadat without any sweetness. To help you avoid sins, remember how ugly it is to sin, and always remember the negative consequences that they bring. One who sins and is persistent in his sins trades the sweetness and security and comfort that comes along with ibadah for the discomfort of sins and the fear and harm that come along with sins. Which sane person exchanges comfort, security, and sweetness for fear and harm? You won't experience the sweetness of ibadah until you create a barrier between yourself and sins. Yahya ibn Mu'adh said the heart cannot experience the sweetness of ibadah when it's burdened with sins. Sins eradicate the sweetness of ibadah. This entire point and its solution can be summarized by a statement from Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala said, if a person feels like their heart isn't enjoying the sweetness of ibadah, they should concentrate on repenting and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. Also, to experience the true sweetness of ibadah, it's important to engage in many various additional acts of ibadah. You can switch the ibadat up with various types of ibadat to keep ibadah interesting, so you stay motivated and engaged. Sometimes, for example, you focus on salah. Other times you focus on fasting and giving charity, making dua, seeking knowledge, spreading da'wah, teaching others to recite the Quran and reciting the Quran. The more you do of these acts, the more you'll feel the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sweetness of the ibadah. By proof from the hadith al-Qudsi, وَلَا يَزَالُ عَبْدِي يَتَقَرَّبُ إِلَيَّ بِالنَّوَافِلِ حَتَّى أُحِبَّهُ فَإِذَا أَحْبَبْتُهُ كُنْتُ سَمْعَهُ الَّذِي يَسْمَعُ بِهِ وَبَصَرَهُ الَّذِي يُبْصِرُ بِهِ. My servant continues to draw near to me with nawafil until I love him. What happens when Allah loves you? When I love him, I'm his hearing with which he hears, and his sight which he sees, and his hands which he strikes, and his foot which he walks. Furthermore, when he asks me, I will surely give it to him. And when he seeks refuge with me, I will grant him refuge. If you seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through nawafil, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حتى أحبه. He will love you. When Allah loves you, He will bring you near to Him. When you are near to Him, you will most definitely taste the ultimate sweetness in your ibadah. Another point is, while you do any of the ibadat, it's essential to consistently reflect upon and renew your niyyah in order to feel their sweetness. Failing to engage with the essence of ibadah may result in the ibadah becoming a mere habitual practice. A ibadah like salah involves words and actions, and it also has a deeper spiritual essence. Some perform salah by reciting the memorized verses and phrases, as well as performing the associated movements, without genuinely contemplating the significance of their words or reflecting on the essence of the ibadah itself. When this occurs, ibadat like salah won't really impact that individual. They'll exit their salah and siyam in the same state that they entered. Why? Ibadat are done many times a day. Some are done tens or hundreds of times a day. And it's common for them to devolve into mere routines if the intention is not refreshed. When this occurs, the sweetness and joy and spiritual fulfillment derived from these ibadat will be lost. Don't turn your ibadat into routines and habits. Rather, turn your habits into ibadat with the right niyyah. Many habits turn into an act of ibadah just by having the right niyyah. Don't let the opposite happen. And while you do all this that we talk about, be mindful of dua. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you with joy in your ibadah. A believer is powerless in this matter and in everything else unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants him strength. Also, in order to taste the sweetness of ibadah, you need to make the purpose of your existence on this earth your number one concern. Ibadah must be your number one concern on this earth. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. A wise individual was once asked, do dunya distractions and thoughts ever come to you while you're in salah? And that person said, is there really anything more important to think about than salah? There's no matter greater than salah. Therefore, how can one contemplate on anything else while he's in salah? Your worries are as big as your concerns. Focus on making ibadah your top priority and your top concern, and you'll attain sweetness in ibadah. If you have a hobby that you really enjoy and you make it your top concern, then there's a chance to participate and get involved in that hobby. You'll be very excited and very happy to take part in it, especially when you're thinking about the rewards and medals that you may earn. By making ibadah your concern, you will find joy in it, in this dunya, while at the same time accumulating ajr with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To make ibadah your greatest concern, you need proper tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a strong connection with attaining sweetness in ibadah. When one places their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding their sustenance, their marriage, their children, their employment, these matters will diminish in their level of concern because they entrusted them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That will then elevate the priority of ibadah as their foremost concern. True tawakkul on Allah will make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshiping Him your biggest concern. You will then find relief from the worries and concerns that you entrusted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. When you perform ibadat, clear your mind of all worldly distractions. When it's time for salah or you want to recite Quran, set aside your worries and concentrate fully on the sacred moment of ibadah. This may prove challenging in the beginning, but with practice, it becomes achievable over time. You need to prepare for ibadah to see its sweetness. For example, Attain and khushu' and sweetness in salah starts way before salah. Even before adhan, it starts in wudu, if not before. Start your internal preparation for salah with wudu and focus on wudu and khushu' and wudu. Some get surprised when you tell them there's khushu' in wudu. When you think about wudu and you realize that while you're washing your face during wudu, it's not only your physical face you're clearing, it's all the sins you've seen with your eyes being cleansed. Similarly, when you wash your hands, all the wrong things you've done with them are being wiped away. The same goes for your feet, as mentioned in the hadith that's in Sahih Muslim. If you truly understand this and you avoid treating wudu as just a physical act, as most do, you'll experience deep sense of humility and sweetness in wudu, and that will be carried on to the salah. When you contemplate that hadith in Sahih Muslim, and there's many more, you'll realize that the water you're washing your physical parts is in reality brightness you're rinsing your heart out with. Then you can understand why many of the Salaf always renewed their wudu even when they were sure they were on wudu. They sought to add brightness on top of brightness, enjoying the sweetness they never got enough of. After wudu, take some time out to do istighfar, recite the Quran, listen to the adhan with concentration, and repeat after the mu'adhin. Just like what I said about wudu. Many get surprised to know that listening to adhan should be like how you listen to the Quran. Ibn Jurayj related in Musannaf Abdul Razzaq that some of the Salaf used to listen to the adhan in the same manner that they listened to the Quran. They listened attentively, in khushu', in contemplation, repeating after the mu'adhin, making dua between the adhan and the iqamah is essential in preparing you for the salah. Making tawbah and istighfar so you can stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a clean slate. Doing all this before salah will attain one's sweetness in those ibadat and then in salah itself. Someone who takes 5 minutes out for salah will not feel the same way as one who prepares himself in the ways that I mentioned. Whatever you do, keep pushing yourself forward in an attempt to create and maintain a feeling of joy in your ibadah. If you don't feel the sweetness in Salat al-Dhuhr, try in Salat al-Asr. If not, try in Salat al-Maghrib. Aim to reach the sweetness of ibadah of Ramadan in the beginning. If you can't, in the middle. If that doesn't work, in the last 10 days. If not, in the 6 days of Shawwal, or the many nawafil that follow, or in next Ramadan, inshallah. Continuously strive to experience the sweetness in ibadah and remain persistent in your efforts. That's a form of jihad in nafs. Some in the past said my nafs was in resistance to the ibadat. Ultimately, I triumphed in guiding my nafs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and my nafs began to rejoice at ibadat. Keep working hard to experience the joy of ibadah through these methods. It takes effort and sacrifice, but your effort will not go in vain and it will not last forever. Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees the servant striving with sincerity, He will help them achieve the level of iman that they seek. He will reward them for their hard work with sweetness in ibadah that surpasses any pain that they endured while they were trying to attain it. We'll stop here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.